Ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to everyone on this warm summer afternoon. My name is Ferenc Sullivan, and I will be the moderator of the present panel entitled Navigating the World of Online Dating. I believe our esteemed guests have already been introduced to you, so let's begin with our first question. A recent University of Chicago poll suggests that over half of young Americans, 18 to 34-year-olds, do not have a romantic partner. And according to the latest Hungarian large sample use survey, 4 in 10 young Hungarians, or 41%, believe that it is hard to find a romantic partner these days, while only 1 in 4, 24%, say that online dating apps are helpful in finding your other half. So my question to our guests is, why does it appear that compared to our parents' generation, young people these days seem to struggle to find a relationship? And how has the rise of online dating affected our ability to form long-term, loving relationships? How have dating apps influenced our attitudes to the basic notions that underpin our society, such as loyalty and commitment?
Well, as I'm prone to do, I blame the internet. So I think it does seem clear based on statistics that the younger generation, so post-Gen X, are having less sex and are less able to find satisfying relationships. And I cannot help but believe it's to do with growing up on the internet. So I'm Gen X. I just met the tail end of Gen X. So I grew up without the internet. I didn't meet the internet until I was like 18 or 19. Every generation that's younger than me has grown accustomed to, they don't know a world outside the internet. So they're used to building relationships, forming friendships, meeting people online, which is not actually how you form relationships, and particular intimate relationships. You can't form an intimate relationship with somebody on the internet. You need to be around them in person. There's so much underlying stuff that's going on, chemistry, smell, body language, etc. And instead, young people are faced with what appears to be endless options. We didn't evolve to be around thousands and thousands of people. We, for most of history, were around very small communities. So we would be around, maybe 100 other people. And today we think we have all these options, and in reality, it seems to be creating less options.
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, I'm very happy to be here and very happy to be in Hungary. It's my first visit. And it reminds me very much of a time before the internet, actually, in the West. And I would like to say to Hungarians that you should stay in this world and not enter into the world that we come from in the rest of the West, North America, and I'm based in the UK, where I would say certain very pernicious values have taken over, and this would include in relation to dating. Things have become extremely depersonalized, inhuman, very, very oriented around consumerism, the idea of treating another human being as a means to an end, a kind of total instrumentalization. The idea that you can kind of choose somebody as if they're like ordering fast food. This has become an extremely dominant way of behaving, which is completely detrimental to both men and women. I think our natural sympathy and our compatibility is being completely eroded and undermined. And I was just looking at some of the research for dating apps and the history of dating applications in the West. They're a multi-billion-dollar industry. Initially, the first app was for gay men, so you've probably heard of Grindr. This was launched in 2009, and I'm old enough to remember when there were articles being published saying this would never work for heterosexual women because the argument was that male and female sexual behavior is so different and that you couldn't get heterosexual women to behave like gay men. Unfortunately, since the launch of Tinder and other apps that are more oriented or geared towards heterosexual dating, we've seen a kind of coercive pattern of, how to put it, almost to encourage everyone to behave in the worst possible way, right? In terms of thinking of sex not as part of an intimate relationship towards a kind of shared future, but rather as something transactional, something potentially kind of violent, something that you are supposed to offer another person. And I think this is a total degeneration and a degradation of what it means to be human.
That's great, thank you. I think the question is awesome, and before I even speak or give my answer, I just want to say how honored I am to be here, and thank you for welcoming me into your great country. Now, to touch on the answer itself, I don't think I'll touch on technology just yet. I think I'm going to tackle what I think to be the root cause of this issue, which is a degradation of the family. So my contention is that we no longer prioritize what it means to be a member of a family and to build a family and make a family. We live in a society that atomizes people, that treats them purely as individuals separated from the family. And in this sort of setup, it is very obvious that people are not going to prioritize relationships. It is obviously the case that they're going to rely on apps. So Sullivan mentioned that statistic from Pew Research, I believe was the original author of that research, and the research indicated that 51% of young people, so individuals between the ages of 18 and 34, were single. They did not have a long-term partner. Now, what that statistic also told us was that that rate was actually 33% in 2004. So we've only now recently seen a precipitous increase in a lack of relationships between young people especially. And if you want to break that down further, there are questions to be asked. Why is it the case? And I referenced at the outset of this little spiel here that it has to do with the family. And if you break down the statistics and you examine why it is that people don't prioritize relationships, they'll say that they prioritize careers or that they're incapable of meeting other people. So I think it was 36% of people who were a part of that study indicated that they prioritized things outside of family more than they did the family itself. Careers, for example, education. As well, I believe it was 30% of people said that they just were not interested in a relationship at all. They were much more interested in focusing on themselves, and that they couldn't find a person of a similar quality with which to get with. But again, I would say that the issue here is family more than it is the apps themselves.
And that brings us to our next question, which is the rise of online dating has also brought about phenomena such as swipe culture and ghosting. Surveys conducted in the developed world, such as the CDC's recent study, the CDC being the chief United States Public Health Authority, show that the mental health of young people has been steadily declining over the past years, and this deterioration accelerated during the pandemic. What impact do you think, dear guests, online dating has on young people's mental health? And how can dating apps improve their algorithms and user experiences to enhance the quality of matches and foster meaningful connections while filtering out harassment? Where does software developers' responsibility end and users' responsibility kick in when it comes to the use of dating apps online?
One thing that's true about dating apps is they're not actually for dating. So dating apps don't actually want you to find a relationship and stop using the app. The dating app is made to keep you on the app. So they're actually programmed exactly like slot machines are. Your incentive is to keep swiping and swiping and swiping until you get a match, you get a hit of dopamine, and then you want that hit again, so you go back to swiping, swiping, swiping. The point is to keep you on the app, to collect data. That's how these apps profit. There's no incentive for these apps to get you off of the app and into a happy long-term relationship. So if you want a meaningful connection and you want a relationship, you should not use dating apps. And I think there's been lots and lots of studies recently. Jonathan Haidt's done good work around this, showing the negative impact on mental health of social media in general. Dating apps constitute social media. They give you the impression that there's endless possibilities and endless options, and that's not true. And I think that I think men have a different relationship with dating apps that women do. I think that most women on dating apps want to find relationships, and a lot of men on dating apps want to find hookups, which means they're operating in totally different ways, and that a lot of young men are treating dating apps sort of in the same way that they do pornography, which is they're seeing women in this really objectified way, in this really one-dimensional way, and therefore they're not engaging with you or the other girls on this app as human beings, which again is never going to create a meaningful relationship. I think that I don't think there's anything that you can do to fix a dating app. I think just don't use them, particularly if you're a woman. I think they're bad for men too, of course, but in terms of what you want, if you're looking for a long-term, maybe a forever relationship, you're looking to start a family, you're not gonna find that on a dating app, or at least it's going to be very unlikely. I know that there's stories we met on a dating app, but those are minorities in terms of what most people find on these apps.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I think a healthier culture will have basically social structures and opportunities for people to meet each other. For example, if you're taking an evening class, if you're attending church, if you are introduced to people through family and through friends, where there's already bonds of trust, there's already somebody saying, hey, have you met this woman or this guy, where people are looking out for each other, where the whole structure is not so individualistic. The Western individualism has become so insane, and this, I think, relates very strongly to the question of mental health. Human beings are not designed to think of themselves as atomized, isolated individuals. They become extremely upset and angry and depressed and start taking drugs and drinking and becoming very, very unhappy because it's not natural for us at all. And the dating apps, I think, absolutely encourage people to treat themselves as if they're selling themselves as a product, this consumerism. The apps themselves, as Meghan very correctly pointed out, don't want you to leave them. They are like slot machines. They're addictive. They are a cross between kind of, pornography and something to buy. And then you start to treat other people as if they were things, and this is, again, a really dehumanizing process. So I think we need to, I think Hungary is already, it never got to this stage and don't get to this stage. But I think for us, the rest of the West, we need to pull back very, very hard from this individualized culture, because the mental health costs and the social costs are so great, and both women and men don't need to be this unhappy. If we had a more light-hearted attitude, if we let things unfold, if we met each other through a third thing. I think there's too much pressure on the dating itself. Whereas if you meet someone because you're interested in the same thing, you're taking an evening class in the history of art, let's say, this is a much more organic and beautiful way to meet someone, without all this pressure, this pressure to have sex or to, do all this. Absolutely horrible pressure people are putting themselves under, and nothing needs to be done in that way. It's causing too much pain, I would say.
I think there's a lot of points to address here. I think the first place I'll start is with regard to effects and causes. So the question being presented is whether or not the dating apps are themselves a cause of the mental illness, whereas my view is that it is actually an effect of increases in mental illness. So Sullivan again mentioned a study by the CDC which looked at the mental illness or the mental health of young people, so individuals in high school and university. And one thing that really struck me with that study was one particular finding that indicated that something like 56% of young women feel a sadness or moroseness. 26% along those lines of young people have planned to commit suicide or have considered it. Now, this is a very serious issue. And I think a lot of these people are then turning to the dating apps as a means of finding a way outside of this moroseness. So I don't think the dating apps themselves are, again, a cause of this issue. I think they're an effect. And what we're looking at, I think societally, maybe not necessarily the case in Hungary because you guys seem to know what you're doing, but certainly in the West, we have what some would call a meaning crisis. So this is Dr. John Vervaeke, and I encourage anyone here who's interested in this particular topic, that is a meaning crisis, check out his podcast with Dr. Jordan Peterson. Great work. But nevertheless, just to speak on this further, is that we've lost what it means to be, again, in a family, but we've more so lost faith in ourselves and society. And again, we turn to the dating apps as a means of solving this problem, when in actuality, it makes the problem even worse. So I think one of the ladies on the panel mentioned, maybe Nina, but mentioning meeting people in settings outside of the dating app. So in settings like this, where you're just coming here and you're having fun. Now, the Institute of Family Studies did a number of studies on this particular issue, whereas the question being, are people who meet their spouses in settings outside of dating apps happier? And the answer was yes. Something like 76% of people who met their spouse or the person that they're married to at church were very happy. And this also was the case for those who met their spouses in church, in college and other social activities. Something like 61% of people who met their partners on social media and apps were happy. So there's a dramatic difference between your level of happiness and where you meet your spouse. And again, we need to re-cultivate this notion of community and family and faith, which I think will help not only with the dating crisis and the mating crisis, but with mental health fundamentally.
While the popularity of online dating has exploded, particularly over the past decade, thankfully, and this may be the solution out of this sorry situation we're in, are still playing the dating game the traditional way. Why do you think many find it difficult, nevertheless, to make the jump between the obscure and anonymous world of online dating and real-life situations? Do you think we could see a resurgence of traditional dating as young people get to value in-person connections, and particularly in the aftermath of COVID lockdowns?
I hope that young people will push back against this always online culture and operating on dating apps. I think that, again, we've seen that using social media, overuse of social media causes anxiety and depression in young people, particularly young women who are being objectified and sexualized on a whole other level. You know, objectification and sexualization has always been a thing for women for a long time anyway, but because they're presenting themselves online, on apps like Instagram, TikTok, on dating apps, and as Nina mentioned, sort of feeling as though they have to sell themselves, which is a really gross way to try to attract people, in my opinion. You know, there is, of course, attraction, and we want to date somebody that we find attractive, but I think what we've forgotten is that attraction isn't really just about a photo. It's not just a physical picture where you see someone as beautiful. It has so much more to do with connection, and you get all these subtle cues that you don't even realize that you're picking up on when you're talking to or you're seeing somebody in real life. And I mean, I want to also say that I think part of the problem with dating in the modern world is that we don't have the same purpose as we used to. We've evolved to start families and reproduce, and I'm not saying that's what we all need to do. I've chosen not to. I'm not interested in kids, and I'm happy, but I think that, you know, when we were dating to find a partner to start a family with, We had specific criteria and specific aims, and that's obviously a kind of glue that keeps a relationship together that's not there. So I think we don't really necessarily know what we're doing anymore. We're sort of aimless. We're like, maybe this person, and where is this gonna go? And we don't know why we're even staying together anymore. And I don't know what the solution is to that, but I think the start is to recognize that that evolution is very much connected to your biology, and it's connected to why you're attracted to different people, and we're not quite as free and liberated as we think we are in that regard, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think the historical context for this is quite important. I mean, we're 60 years or so after the sexual revolution. There's a very good book called Against the Sexual Revolution by Louise Perry, which I strongly recommend people read. It's not out in Hungarian yet, but I hope that somebody translates it. And Louise and others are looking back basically at the past few decades and really pointing out that we're hopefully or potentially at the end of a certain kind of sequence, which is to do with the idea of liberation of desire. We have an entire culture that's oriented around a fantasy or an image of sexual freedom as an expression of the self, right? This is not what sex is for. Nevertheless, our culture has, pursued this fantasy and at the expense of imagining these qualities like loyalty, fidelity, fortitude, courage, determination, all of the things that you actually need in order to stay with somebody, have a family, and make things work, because it's not always easy, but it is very beautiful and it is very rewarding. And instead, we have this short-term culture, and really the only kind of person that benefits in this culture, which is fundamentally oriented around a fantasy of desire, is the cad. I don't know the Hungarian word for cad, but a cad is somebody who really has no commitment, is somebody who walks around the world doing typically whatever he wants, although of course, you can encourage women to behave more like men. It doesn't suit them, but we've also has a culture, like I said at the beginning, that has taken its model, male sexual desire, in the extreme and said everybody has to behave like this now. It's very, very bad for women especially. It's also bad for men. But I think this image of the cad is hopefully coming to an end. When we say, look, people can't just treat each other as means to an end. We actually do have relations with other. We're not individuals. We're not solely determined by what it is that we think we want to do. And often what we think we want is not actually what we want. This is the lesson of psychoanalysis also, which can be helpful here. So I think and in relation to this kind of depression and the anxiety and all of the problems that we're seeing in a very, very, this kind of desire-based techno culture that we have in the West, I think we might see a rebellion also against these constraints, because especially for young people and during the lockdowns and so on, everything is online. And when everything becomes the same, it becomes very uncool. And I think we will see a rebellion in our lifetimes against the fact that school is online, your parents are online, you're being constantly monitored and surveilled, you might be cancelled if you say the wrong thing. We've created basically a kind of headless Stasi, which everyone is participating in. It's absolutely horrific. And I think that young people at some point will engage in a rebellion against the rebellion of their previous generation. So what would it mean to oppose the sexual revolution? This is an interesting question. Will it be a return to forms of chastity, which is not celibacy? Chastity is more like the control of sexual behavior and the understanding that in order to be a good person, in order to be a good woman and a good man, we actually have to have higher values and higher meanings, which we are all capable of. We are not simply reducible to our base desires. This is an animalistic culture. If all we say is we are what we desire, we are not only what we desire. We can absolutely aspire to better things.
There's a lot of things to talk about there. I guess the first thing I'm going to say is don't be a cad. Those people are pestilential. They destroy things. They create nothing.
How would you describe a cad?
A cat is what you just said. Actually, the question presented to me was how would I describe a cat? A cat is a Chad without any care, right? Going around spreading seed, as it were, and siring children without any responsibility would probably be the best definition. Now, touching on the question being posed here about whether or not young people will return to tradition, I think it is the question, and the answer I would provide is, well, what example is being given to them? In the United States, 41% of children are born out of wedlock. In essence, they're born in broken households. So where is the example being set for them on how to live in a stable family, how to build a stable family? Anyone here familiar with the Roman Empire? Virtually everyone here. Everyone here is familiar with the Roman Empire in some way, shape, or form. Now, if you read a book, The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire by Brian Ward Perkins, I believe, he talks about why the Roman Empire fell. Now, there's a number of reasons, but one of the main things he touches on is a failure of institutions or a failure to perpetuate institutions. Now, if we take pottery, for example, so his example he gives is pots. And he says that if you look at the quality of pottery over the course of the Roman Empire, you can see a slow degradation, which means that the art of pottery was the Romans were not able to pass on that art to successive generations. So the quality became worse and worse and worse. Now, the same thing has to be applied in the case of Western civilization to families. Western civilization is an agglomeration of several institutions. The family, I think, is at the very top. And in my estimation, we've lost the ability to perpetuate the family. We no longer are able to spread why the family is good and the values inherent to the family to successive generations. We set no example for them. And so it's no surprise why it is that a lot of people are using these apps, are in broken relationships, are not interested in finding a partner. And it all goes back to the fact that we don't have stable families anymore, and we don't know how to maintain stable families. Also, don't be a cat.
And we promise not to this time. Right. So, as couples tend to walk the streets hand in hand, so do various social phenomena tend to go hand in hand. And I think Vincent mentioned Vivek Murthy in his previous answer, who as a US Surgeon General issued a 50-plus page advisory on the mental health and the deteriorating mental health of young people in the United States, which means that official government agencies are now starting to recognize that this is a major issue and something has to be done about it. I think that's a step forward, definitely. And also, of course, that what we are seeing now in the US, we're seeing a juvenile crime epidemic, and something has to be done about that too, particularly in large cities. And I think that's preventing a lot of young people from venturing out into the streets physically and forming in-person, real-life relationships, or just encountering new situations which could lead to a new relationship. So we have that to deal with, but another issue is privacy, and the European Union, for example, likes to talk about that too. As our lives go increasingly digital, the issue of privacy in our intimate relationships, and this is particularly relevant to Vincent's topic, is perhaps more important, more topical than ever. California legislators have recently passed a revenge porn law, making it a crime for anyone to post online photos or videos of someone's intimate body parts without their consent. Do you think it is necessary to impose such regulations, or does the tightening of legislation and the ever-present emphasis on risks deter even well-meaning people from romantic pursuits in the first place, contributing to the loneliness in society? So my question relates to our obsession with risks, but it also relates to safety as a genuine concern, both online and in the real world. Thank you.
I don't actually think that the real world is quite as scary as feminists have made it out to be. I think that going out in the world and socializing and meeting new people and having fun is, for the most part, fun, and it's not something to be scared of. Often what I read online, or, I would say over the past decade, tells women to be, terrified of being outdoors because they're going to get attacked or sexually assaulted. And of course, that does happen a lot, and we need to be careful. But I think that one of the main problems with dating online and operating online and meeting people online is that there's zero accountability. So these are strangers. You know nothing about this person. This person doesn't have relationships with anyone you know, which is so different than how we've dated and met people really ever throughout history. Even, recent history, where you would meet friends, or you'd meet men or women through friends of friends, you'd meet them through sports, you'd meet them at college or university or church or wherever, a friend of the family. There's accountability, because if a man behaves badly, then his family might know, and his friends will know, and his community will know. If you meet a man online and you go meet him and you hook up, he can essentially get away with what he wants in a lot of ways. So I would highly recommend not meeting strangers. I'm truly shocked at how many women are willing to go out on a date with or go to the home of some guy that they've met on the internet who they know nothing about. And I think it's really dangerous. I also am really troubled by the normalization, and this ties into the revenge porn thing, the normalization of sending nudes. Young girls in high school, even younger, are sharing nudes with boys online through apps. And I think they feel that they maybe have to do this to get a guy to compete because other girls are doing this. And I just want to say that this is not how you find a boyfriend. Like, you're not going to make a man love you and commit to you by sending pictures of your nude body to him over Snapchat or Instagram or whatever. So I hope that any young woman who thinks that she has to do this to attract a man will not do it. It's so dangerous. I mean, revenge porn is a really big problem, and it's very traumatic. It's a really traumatic experience. Don't send pictures of your body. I feel like I'm lecturing now on the internet. But yeah, I mean, this is just part of porn culture. I think girls and boys alike have unfortunately grown up with online porn and have really normalized operating in that way. And they've combined their dating life and their friendship life and their online life with pornography, and it's all become really tied up together in a really gross, destructive, dangerous, and risky way. So certainly I think there should be laws against revenge porn, but I think that there has to be accountability on the other end too, where you don't do that. And I mean, of course, boys should also be taught not to pressure or expect girls to do that as well. But yeah, it's really, the danger is for women in this regard, and young women in particular.
Yeah, I think there's a deeper question here, which is about limits and boundaries and differences. So when you have a culture that seeks to erode all boundaries, which Western liberalism undoubtedly does, so it seeks to pretend that there's no difference between men and women, or at least these are somehow, interchangeable words that are free to pick. If we pretend that there's no difference between children and adults, if we pretend there's no difference between the public and the private, if we say that sexuality is permitted everywhere at all times, this is what it means actually to live in a truly pornographic culture, where there is absolutely no difference. There's nothing is private, nothing is protected, nothing is sacred. Actually, is what it means. That all of these differences and all of these boundaries are no longer protected by anyone. And again, the people who benefit from this erosion of all of these things are not well motivated. Let's put it that way. And I think we need to be very, very clear that there have to be boundaries, so that, for example, somebody's private life is private. You know, that it can't be used as a kind of policy position, which is how we see the weaponization of pride and LGBT and so on, right? These are things that are being taken up by corporations and being used, in fact, to divide people very seriously by pushing this stuff very, very explicitly everywhere. And so that the moment anybody says, hang on, I'm not really okay with this, or this is a bit much, you know, you can immediately demonize this person, you know, for being homophobic, transphobic, blah, 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 prudish, you know, not sexually liberated, as if these things are somehow a mark of a bad person. And I think we see this in the public sphere, you know, the sexualization of bodies absolutely everywhere, and nothing is held back. And I think actually sexuality depends upon there being a gap, a distance between the private and the public. And I think we need more decorum. I realize I sound maybe a bit puritanical, but trust me, I mean, once you see the other side and where this liberation plays out, I think you maybe have an experience or a realization. You know, I would have counted myself as a liberal person until a few years ago, but you know, you wake up and you see actually what it means. It does mean the erosion of everything that we hold dear, in fact.
So the question being asked is our views on the government of California's passing of this policy. Now, the fact that a policy is even prescribed or passed that has to deal with revenge porn is in and of itself a sign of moral rot and degradation within our society. Why are we even having this discussion? We've gotten to the point where this has now become a piece of policy that's being enacted. And it's almost making me feel bad because I'm now supporting a policy that is being proposed by members of state in California who propose a number of other silly policies, not necessarily saying this one is a silly policy. But the larger point I want to address here was why we look to governments to solve problems that we should be solving ourselves. Now, the issue of revenge porn shouldn't be something that legislators in California solve. It should be a problem solved by parents in households telling their children how to behave in relationships. Now, Meghan brought up a good point about teaching young boys about not pressuring girls and perhaps teaching young girls about how to engage in these sort of relationships. Now, again, you know, I've made the point, and I think the other panelists have made the point around the necessity of families. Having social conditions and structures that prevent people from going out and destroying their lives. And Sullivan pointed out something interesting, and this was the increase in youth crime and crime rates in the United States as a result of a lack of family. One statistic I want to mention to you guys, it's one of the most renowned studies done by criminologists out there, and the study specifically looked at what happens to crime rates when men are in stable families, when they have wives and kids. Now, there's a 35% lower crime rate or relative crime commission rate when a man is in a stable relationship and has a wife and kids, relative to when he doesn't. So what this tells me is that we don't need legislators necessarily to be passing these sort of laws that cover revenge porn and the sort. This is all something that is easily handled within the home. Okay, you don't need your lawmakers to get involved. Now, just speaking about the culture as well and talking about the concept of revenge porn, I think is something interesting as well, because I think that this concept, it ties into a term that I'm trying to coin, and no one is really picking it up, but I'll try again. It's called sexual brinksmanship, where in the modern world, there's an escalating level of sexual degradation and impropriety that is being committed by people, where, you know, if one person were to perform a sexual act on the other, that becomes a norm for everyone else in a stable relationship, or in order to be in a stable relationship. So we have to get around this system of sexual brinksmanship and a lack of family structure by, again, reinculcating this notion of family and I guess filial piety, loyalty, and duty, and all these things.
The young Dutch political activist Eva Fradigerbrug, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, has spoken about the danger posed by the contractualization of sexuality, and this plays into the issue we've been talking about, the danger of the depersonalization of our personal relationships. For example, Denmark has been experimenting with apps, mobile apps, that ask for consent before intimacy. So before you engage in intimacy with someone, you can, or you are obliged to, prospectively, indicate your consent on a app, so it can be later referenced in the case of a complaint, for example. Should such methods become widespread, what implications would there be on society? And this is a difficult question, of course, since these platforms are evolving so quickly and society is changing so quickly. But what developments would you anticipate in the world of either online dating or traditional person-to-person dating over the next decade?
I mean, I think this kind of app where you would sort of pre-consent to a sexual encounter sounds a lot like prostitution. I think it is a complete lack of understanding for how sex and relationships work. Even all this talk around, you know, keep asking, is this okay, is this okay, is this okay, as you move through the steps of hooking up or making out or having sex or whatever you're doing, is kind of crazy to me. It's not natural, and it discounts the fact that so much of human communication is about body language and, again, these kind of subtle cues, touch, facial expressions. You have to pay attention to the other person as a human being. That's how you figure out if they want to have sex with you or not, and it really shouldn't be that complicated. These are things that humans have evolved to do over centuries and centuries. I think that it's a really bad idea to agree to a sexual encounter before you're even physically with this person. And I find it really kind of appalling and horrific that we're trying to turn something that should be fun and beautiful and exciting and kind of magical and maybe kind of emotionally dangerous in some ways. I mean, there are risks, and that's why love can be scary, and that's why love is so meaningful, that we're trying to turn it into this check a box, sign a piece of paper, you check all my boxes, so yes, let's have sex. I mean, I can't imagine having sex in that way. It literally is like prostitution. You go and meet a stranger, you've agreed to do this, you do it, you go home. I mean, you'd have to be a sociopath to enjoy that, and I think it's really painful, particularly for women who are wired to want more than that. You know, we pretend like, and we have pretended in these modern times through third wave feminism that, as Nina mentioned earlier, that women can have sex like men, that they can operate like men, that they can have casual sex, that they can hook up and then move on to the next guy the next weekend. But that's not really how we're wired. We get attached, and we're supposed to get attached, and you should take that into account when you're engaging in sexual encounters and dating men. It's not truthful, and I think it's setting people up, women in particular, for disappointment and pain, and trying to shut down what really are natural emotions and feelings that you should be paying attention to.
Yeah, I think consent is one of those flimsy, legalistic ways of that liberalism has tried to paper over, actually, some of its contradictions and how it actually tries to turn everything into a business arrangement or a bureaucratic situation, as Meghan beautifully described. And you know, really, there's a big pushback among some people in Britain who I'm talking to a lot, who are very interested instead of the idea of the contract, which is, you know, very legal document, but rather thinking about the idea of the covenant. And maybe there's this separation in Hungarian, you know, so the contract is like a legal thing, you know, you can, when you buy something in a shop, you have a receipt, that's like a contract, you know, and a covenant is something much deeper, it has a much more religious origin, it incorporates questions of duty and responsibility, and it's something in itself that's sacred, that is, you know, like we would say, like a marriage bond. It, of course, is from this position of the state is a contract, but from a position of somebody who's involved in a marriage, it's much more than this, right? And the same could be true, or should be true, really, of all of our intimate relationships. You know, we have duties to our parents, we have duties and responsibilities to our friends, actually, and I think friendship is one of the the things that has been eroded the most in this transactional culture. You know, we're talking about relationships and sexual romantic relationships, but friendship too, and all of those kind of bonds of loyalty, and the way in which we should actually stand by our friends, not just when they're fun and cool and being nice, but also when they're suffering and when they're being cancelled and ostracized. You know, we've lost the memory of friendship as well. And you know, just to return to something that Louise Perry has said, she in her book, Case Against the Sexual Revolution, she points out that actually women need to ask themselves a series of heuristic questions before they have sex with a man that has nothing to do with consent. She says, ask yourself, if you have sex with this man and you accidentally become pregnant, would you be able to even talk to him about this situation? You know, and if the answer is no, then what on earth are you doing? You know, and she really presents this entirely alternative way of seeing the world, which is not through the transactional, not through these flimsy, paper-thin ideas of consent, but really in terms of these deeper bonds, and to suggest that actually all of these decisions and relations are profoundly meaningful. You know, the West has inculcated an absolute nihilism at the heart of how people see themselves. You know, people are not treating themselves with respect because they don't think that their bodies matter or that their lives matter. And they absolutely do. You know, everything we do has a significance. It has a meaning. It has a, you know, a higher, you know, the higher conception somehow. And we've been taught to really forget that. You know, we think that everything we do is throwaway and flimsy and, you know, it doesn't matter. But it really, really absolutely does.
Just going back to the original question, which was the law that was or the app, sorry, that was created. So it's a funny story, and I just want to talk about the app for a second before I go into my answer. So the app in question was created by some Danish, I guess, company, and the idea was that it was supposed to be in reflection of an act that was passed by the Danish government, which indicated that both parties had to say that they gave consent before the sexual act was committed. So before, it was one person having to say no. So the idea was that the app was supposed to be a form of recording or evidence to suggest that both parties had given their consent as it relates to a case of rape or an accusation of rape or an attempted rape. So that was the idea behind it. Now, the thing about the app in question is that when you actually start to think about it, it doesn't make any sense. So in my estimation, the app itself is evidence of solutionism. So solutionism is a concept where we create solutions to problems that don't exist. So consent in and of itself is not actually a problem when no one is having sex or when there's a reduced number of people having sex. So I think that statistic was mentioned by Meghan before, or at least the concept was mentioned before. But an interesting statistic to bring this point into clarity is a statistic that was sort of created by or published by the Washington Post, where it was that 29% of men between the ages of 18 and 35 had not had sex in the past 6 months. So no one's having sex. So the law in question, or excuse me, the app in question is solutionism. But I would take it even further to tell you that that app is actually iatrogenic, which means that it has the opposite effect of what the lawmakers would have wanted. I'll explain. So in Denmark, for example, they have a bit of a population crisis where, again, the fertility rate is being decreased. Again, no one is having sex. And this app in question has the opposite result of what is being intended, where if the goal is to have more kids, this app is going to do the opposite, as it sort of puts people into a bind on how to engage in relationships. Now, I guess that's the one thing to say about the app. The other thing is I don't think people in other countries, at least in that area or generally, are going to subscribe like an app to an app like this. I think if you looked at the ratings, it was like, it got like 2.5 stars out of 5 for the first several thousand reviews that were sent. But I want to touch on that final part of the question there on future trends, because I think that's important. So where are we going from this point forward? I am not necessarily the most hopeful when it comes to families and sexual relationships and the use of apps, because I think that we are headed for, shall we say, dark times. And I think that what it's looking like, at least technologically speaking, is that we're going to see a rise in apps like this, for example, but more so a rise in sex robots that integrate artificial intelligence. So can you imagine that? Men who no longer have a need for women in the sense of sexual gratification or comfort or any of that stuff, because all this is being outsourced to a machine, a sex robot with artificial intelligence being integrated. But yesterday someone said to me that if you're going to speak on something negative or propose a negative message, it is important to speak on hope. And I've come here to Hungary, I've engaged with the people, I've spoken to Balázs Orbán and a few people at MCC, and I'm given hope. Because in a country like Hungary, where family is taken seriously, these things are not necessarily a problem, as they are in the West. So to you, I would say, keep up the good work, make sure family is a core part of your civilization and society, and do such a good job that everyone else in the West wants to be like you.
Our conversation is slowly coming to an end, but as a final question, I would like to challenge the three of you to deliver a takeaway message to our audience and to summarize your views on this topic. Thankfully, we have a lot of young people in our audience. Many will be using dating apps, others will not. So how would you summarize the conclusion of this conversation to them? We have very different viewpoints, data science, philosophy, and journalism. So I hope this is going to be an intriguing conclusion to today's conversation.
I think that I would say, if I weren't a cynic, which I tend to be, that I hope that, as Nina mentioned earlier, there'll be a rebellion. I hope that what people will do is to reject the idea of engaging in all aspects of life online, from work to relationships to gaming to shopping, to every different kind of engagement, and start to remember how important it is for us to interact one-on-one, to be around other people. I had hoped that this is one of the lessons that we learned from the COVID lockdowns, actually, which is that just surviving is not enough. Just being in an apartment and having access to all the things that you want or all the things that you think you want, from food to various products you can order on Amazon, just because you can work online, just because you can exist in your apartment, technically exist and do everything that you need to do, that doesn't mean that it's good for us. Certainly what I learned is it's not enough for me, not that I ever necessarily thought it was, but being forced to stay inside my apartment and not touch other people and to laugh and dance and sing and play sports and just, even just talking to the barista. We need, as humans, we need human interaction. We need human touch. We need community. Community is one of the major things that I think has been lost and that we've forgotten to value in the modern age. We need communities. We need to feel that we're accountable to other people. We need to, value family and relationships and celebration and grief. We need to be able to mourn and, have weddings and funerals and birthdays and celebrate the birth of babies. And I hope that people won't buy into the idea that you can meet people online, that you can have friendships online, that you can have love online, because you can't. You need to go out and talk to people face to face and touch people and share spit.
Yeah, I think learning how to respect yourself and trust your instincts is very important, and also to trust those people around you who care about you, and maybe particularly people who are older than you and who know more about the world. I think, the West fetishizes youth and beauty above all else, and it tends to turn its back on wisdom and the things that our ancestors knew, but we're still very much like the same kind of creature as we were 2,000 years ago, and so on, and all of the same things are true of us, all of the emotions, both negative and positive. So I think we need to slow down fundamentally, and to listen and respect those things that were here before us, and all of the relationships that we didn't choose, but we have obligations towards, in fact, precisely in their not being chosen. You know, we're not individuals. You know, this is the great fantasy of the past few decades. You know, we are profoundly relational. Everything we do matters. We have to look after ourselves in relation to other people. And I think there's no rush. I think young people often feel this great pressure to enter into sexual life and so on. And a healthy society will always have room. It will support the family. It will say that this is probably the right thing for most people. It undoubtedly is. It's much better for most people to be married and have children. There will always be a small number of people who, for whatever reason, can't or don't want to. And these people must be respected as well. But they're not the norm, you know. And I think to say, look, we need to have a society that prioritizes the family, you know, as Hungary is doing. And I think this is absolutely correct. The family is the social unit. It's the primary thing that every country should care about, first and foremost. It's not the individual. And I think this is something that we all have to rewire our brains, you know, in the West to understand these deeper truths.
So in closing, I guess in summary, I'll give one bit of advice and then I'll provide a prescription. So the bit of advice would be for the young people here, if you're looking for a partner, put your phone down, go and talk to somebody that you don't know. And don't make it a thing where you're trying to get into a relationship. Just get to know the person. That's all. All I'm suggesting is just be yourself and be genuine. If someone can't accept you for who you are, then they'll never accept you. Okay, so that's my bit of advice. Get down off your phones, go talk to somebody. My prescription would be 3 things, and in order. Faith, family, country. Okay? You have to have something which transcends or is a overarching framework, which is faith. Something to guide why it is that you have family and why it is that you have kids. Family is important because it's the fundamental building blocks by which we create a society. And again, country is very obvious. We're here in Hungary, celebrating Hungary and all it has to offer. So take pride in your country and take pride in who you are and take pride in your family and your faith. And everything else is fine after that. That's all I have to say.
With that, our conversation this afternoon comes to a close. Meghan Murphy, Nina Power, and Vincent Harinam, thank you very much for your valuable contributions. And ladies and gentlemen in the audience, thank you very much for your attention. And we all wish you a pleasant afternoon. Thank you.